지금 저기 장가들야 저기 샘 뒤에 탑람 샘기 삼르다타 토네 냠랭기 심바 손샤바디 당은저 가산 도스진에 고수거래 지선다 먼저 가산 쉬어야되라 다가실에 좀 제름식이 람드마 냠랭 심바 송샤바디 안지기 녀마 상여 점nen데 달아서바다 남바담바는 송샤바디 송바디 안제름지 고롱한 냠nen제 된 냠nen제네 되는 냠nen이 토네 근데 냠용어 토네마 송바지리마도 남아시한다기 마 송바지 뭐 녀마 마 송바지게 사버 송야가 해민도스 대다이 된데 마셰바딜라 경어서 야네 야도 퇴제 된들라 삼제 야네 야도 냠nen제가 있나 소수게 삼는 냠nen이 심바디 오 공부도 조그레스 베네 무디제제나 조그레스 베나가 저기 추추 티베리기 사바디 견진마 아나 차고 도로시 차고 지면에 다 이거는 빼야다 되네게 어도 용고레스 디나징아도 무디제 냠nen제 오레스 디제바는 냠 야기 조그레스 가서 당한도 조로 디레 되네 쉬로와.
Good morning. So yesterday we started to look at this text from Lama Tsongkhapa, and what is presented here is a technique by which we can train our mind, transform our very way of thinking. And this is the meaning of Buddhist practice. Buddhist practice means to train our mind, train our very way of thinking. So amongst the verses we looked at yesterday, we saw Lama Tsongkhapa saying to his students who requested this teaching, that what Lama Tsongkhapa, or how Lama Tsongkhapa himself had lived his life, was precisely in accordance with the teachings of the Buddha. In other words, as he received the teachings, in that same way, he trained his mind, just like the Buddha himself had done and taught the entire subsequent generations of teachings. So in other words, there's nothing new to be said, there's nothing that needs to be added for the time then. Rather, by relying on the teachings of the Buddha, which are correct and complete and unmistaken, one will be able to radically transform one's mind. And also we saw yesterday through an illustration the need to train repeatedly over a sustained period with the combination of continuity as well as effort. And the illustration there was that of water droplets. Water droplets slowly, over time, wear out even the hardest of boulders. So by applying oneself to the teachings, cultivating them again and again in one's mind, slowly over time, one will become habituated to wholesome ways of thinking and break one's habituation to unwholesome ways of thinking. And this is the meaning of training one's mind, the meaning of Buddhist practice. Continuing with the text from the 6th verse. Alas, due to my greatest being of feeble intelligence and lacking the excellent protection of wise advice, they fervently rush through the doorway to deterioration, engaging forcefully without interruption.
Dijena Mopana to Dumo Grace, Denigi, Lagi, number Chemashimba, and Lord Nyamchua, yes, Nyamchua, Denigi, Nyamchu, Denigi, Langi, number Chemashimba, Mashimba together, then Nyamchuas, Nyamchu, said this. Draw said, then Yawa Ida to draw Mida Hadwa.
Looking at the first line, the first word, alas, then this is an expression of pity or of compassion, and it's directed towards migrators. So migrators is a term that's used to refer to beings who are bound in cyclic existence, whether humans, animals, unseen beings, that migrate between the various realms of samsara. So beings who are still bound within the suffering realms of samsara. And compassion is expressed towards them because they are of feeble intelligence. And intelligence we should understand as the ability to use reasoning, to think for oneself. And in this particular context, it's using reasoning to identify clearly and correctly what should be adopted, in other words, wholesome ways of thinking, and what should be abandoned, unwholesome, harmful ways of thinking. So migrators are of feeble intelligence in that they both do not know well what should be adopted and what should be abandoned, nor even what they do understand. They struggle to live in accordance with that understanding.
Legi number chasing and had a me mumbo or water, Kawachena, Ditibu Dunga Tiki Yungre, and Dunga Casatiba Savane, Tibu Dunga Yungre said the chasing agent, Jina Yor Walhada Mila Yore, that they did had a meeting machine and the Hamawan, the Sigurd Wada, Zidanya Wada, Ida, that is Dundo, and Denigi Hada Mine, Denigi, and the Jig, Langi, number Chemashing, Lord Nyamchua, the Yesi or that. Madoyaji, Michasan Mida, La Chasan Sigur Marwa.
And to be precise, here the compassion is being expressed to migrators, so all beings bound within samsara, but there certainly are amongst beings who are still bound in samsara, some humans and gods, those who already do have a good understanding of what should be adopted and abandoned, and are successfully training their mind, abandoning the ways of thinking which are harmful, and becoming ever more habituated to wholesome ways of thinking. So there are many humans and gods within that category. But here it's referred to the vast majority of beings, those who really are lost and confused.
다 건설려 추신 세대 세대라 가서래 개비 냠랭이 림바 근데 추신 바즈 제 가서래 추신라도 규되는 신은 제보 있는 야고 중그레 셈베게다 이게 제 개비 냠랭이 림바디 마 돈바스 마 땡해요 말해서 돈베게 추신 돈베게 담배 고매베 세대 되네게 추신 돈베게 다 고갑 건설야 고갑디 되네게 요 말해 코로나도 되네게 가서래 게티글 응도를 냠는 제기 안에 고갑디 매바레 되니까 돈바 라비아게 매 라비아게 라켄 매바레 제자 라비아게 고갑 매바레 되네 라켄 안에 지금 담배 고 매바서 담바라네 되니까 마노와 야고 땡현지 고갑지 기현지 라마 기현지 라교 말해서지도 나디스 워다 수준 돈베게 담배 고 매베서 코로나 중원에 자 되니까 라비아게 냠내기 림바 마티에기 야고 땡신간 수신 야고 마노와 땡신간 겐디라고 말해서 아니 그런 경우에는 그런 중에 자 되게 자야 고급라고 말해서 그러다더니 공부 공부에서는 랍캔서다 냠는 림바 땡칸 라마 다 저기 당아주 시에서 마전에 기해서 지금
The second line, lacking the excellent protection of wise advice. So here we can change the translation slightly. Excellent protection can change to excellent protector, in that it refers to one's spiritual teacher. So these migrators to which compassion is being expressed are of feeble intelligence because they they lack an excellent protector, or can be translated as a holy or holy protector. Someone who is able to give wise counsel, wise advice. This is advice in terms of which are the wholesome minds which one needs to cultivate in order to gain protection from suffering. Which are the unwholesome minds that need to be abandoned in order to gain protection from suffering. So again, the excellent protection should rather be understood as an excellent protector, referring to one's spiritual teacher, the spiritual teacher who gives wise advice in terms of how to train one's mind. And these migrators of feeble intelligence lack such guidance.
Dada tsujin dunbige da gasa denegi lore nyamchua sosyo ngone ane gohab marawar wad bene 지금 야와 바다 이다 세야 된가 통고 말때 된데 세도 여러 바다 그냥 건설이야 최냐의 그런 띵이 전에 고갑기네라요 말바다 야와 바다 이다 바다 이 최냐의 고갑라요 말고 띵이 그런 정은 최시간 주에나 냐야 고갑라요 말바 디나신 dunduang 저 배는 취나라 냐다 부신다 되네게 직dun도를 빡도 매봐 여러데 되네게 dun도 릭 상와 가시한 저기 민념 되행키다 심미데 되네 셈제 가시가 제일 고갑되어서 자식을 맞으신 셈제 망쳐와려 소수용원에 직 되네게 저기 개바단 디바디제나 아니 제보 마오반에 디기 용그레 디제네 제보 누가 용그레서 배 자하기 녀 그 고합 그런 거를 요 말하다 랍칸지 여배나 지게 안주비데 부신로 부도와 막고 딘데된 아주 되네게 어디제네 디보여다 켜는 지기요 말데 셰베나 콘소 고야요 막고 말아 지금 고 코로나 정원에다 진짜 고합 라규미도 와서 라야요 말레스 라규요 말레스 김전 직디레다 그 냠초아인데 되네게 레잉이 로르치 로르요 말 콘솔이 되네게 수준 돈비게 돈바들에 냠는 제고 고합 라규요 말레스 띵이 전에 로와 디 라규요 말레스 아니 지 코로나로 고갑 되네게 고갑 말아서 콘솔에 띵행기 람냠리 짐바 띵행 고야요 말했다. 고야 라마 기위신 콘솔이야 디냠리 짐바 띵행 고야라고 말했어. 진짜 디네다 니체에서 그러다.
If you think of the situation in particular of beings in the lower realms, it's most obvious that they are lost without protection, in that amongst the characteristics of beings in the lower realms, they lack the intelligence to be guided by a spiritual teacher. So if we take animals, for example, there are so many animals throughout the world, especially when we think of the fish in the ocean, the varying types and the vast number of insects and so forth. So many animals. And all of them lack a protector, someone who can guide them in how to transform their mind. And perhaps amongst the animals in the world, the most fortunate ones are those that are household pets. Because household pets at least have their material provisions well taken care of. But your cat or dog at home, no matter how well you and how faultlessly you guide them in the Dharma, they cannot understand what you are saying. They cannot understand how to train their mind so as to gain protection from suffering. So this is the great difficulty of beings in the lower realms, that they lack a guide, they lack the capacity to be guided to transform their minds, which means for them to cultivate the virtue required to be born in the higher realms is very difficult. So therefore, for an immense period of time, an immense number of lifetimes, they end up remaining bound within the suffering of the lower realms. So these certainly are amongst those of the most feeble intelligence. So one here reflects on the situation of beings in the lower realms, just how hopeless their situation is and how helpless they are to to transform their situation in that they cannot be guided in how to accumulate virtue and how to abandon non-virtue, which means it's very difficult for them to create causes to be born out of those suffering realms.
Kasori sosugi nyayagi kokap maradi chijegi denige samlo medu and delia tungen lamden chihanje lamachia gewishin dadine ragyo marchibarwada dunrotina chibachaderwa lumi ba chibayimbala gewe nyamen jawa madubadi da chibarchaderwa.
Actually, the situation is similar for many humans and gods too, in that so many humans and gods, whilst they are born in the high realms, they lack much interest in ethics. They have very little, if any, interest in how to train their mind. They lack any interest in cultivating wholesome ways of thinking and abandoning unwholesome ways of thinking. And lacking such interest, they cannot be guided in this way by a spiritual teacher because they lack interest. So in this way, whilst they may be in the body of a human or god, they are quite similar they are in quite a similar situation to that of animals. So therefore, too, they are of feeble intelligence.
And that nibadile gubi kola beba trabo yi sede trabo yi yumi cheba rabdo chubarche sede da gubi ko sede nga guba labde nga zo kanga sigarwa jasa kanga yoya kanga ane chige setele na kanga de jewa chimaye na kanga de dene kanga yoya yunju gubi kola de kanga yunju di sigara yugare dipa di sigara jasa dibi lega de beba trabo yumi cheba chubarche jasa be bezu cheche Dibu saya dibu yang gud, ada dunga yang gud diba dila ya, ngajel dibu Jawa dila ya, ngadu bezu je, gundu je, gumme je, mudu ne, ane jigur was, sini kaki dirwada. Gumme je ba ju mudu je rwa, juba je sen jigur esir.
The third and fourth line, they fervently rush through the doorway to deterioration, engaging forcefully without interruption. So lacking interest and guidance in what is wholesome and to be cultivated, what leads to virtue, and and lacking interest in finding out what is to be abandoned, what are the causes of suffering, they rush through the doorway to deterioration. Deterioration we should understand as the accumulation of causes of future problems, suffering, and difficulties. So beings who are of feeble intelligence, they, with great vigor and without interruption, they accumulate causes that will just lead to ongoing suffering.
Chike denigi nyamlen che ma shinge ngi chue gedige nyamlen che ma shin mi na da lai na da suyu ne chik liya khoro sa de ni gedi na yo ba che chik thubu ja yo ba che an chik gedi na chik le ne ba che de yo ba che gro je san dine san din an ju gedi la nyu mi che ba gedi na di ma samlo de li de di samlo de denigi shen liya khoro sa ya shen liya chao do je ya shen liya an che wa che ge samlo di mudu je delay yadu ane chike di ane samlo di nga zuke dunga yongayage ane gyu ba na kanga thege gyu chale yorwa jeza di gyu ko beba de yang bezu je je ane gyu me che ba chi go re sa di da du se samdana bena zuke semje nga zu mi ro chi ne chike jida de ne dibi chewa jele bezu chewa ya ta ndunro yin na hwa zu ji le chu bo ya ji le ji sue ge samda de bezu che che an ji go ro bezu shi na ka le ge de de sha da je gang an je du shi go ro ba de ne za du shi ne de du shi gyu me che ba yong re si gyu me che ba si de da du shi ne hwa zu ji ji ne da ma shi ba du 딜레가 될 바도신 지고로 받아 된자 되네게 규매 쳐봐주 지고에서 두사 송고로 받아.
This is a very useful point to reflect on, because it really is the situation. When we recognize how this is the case for the vast majority of beings, we will see that it is something so pitiful. Because when we observe how most beings live their lives, desiring happiness, wanting to be freed from suffering, they engage in certain activities thinking that it will bring them happiness, yet it just accumulates further causes for suffering. Beings get angry, thinking that through their anger and acting under their anger, happiness will follow. But in the end, they just make causes for their own suffering. Wanting happiness, beings engage in conflict with others, are aggressive towards others, maybe physically harm or even kill others, with the hope, the expectation that somehow happiness will follow. And when we observe the behavior of animals, we can see this very clearly too, how they engage in certain behavior, getting very aggressive over things that from our perspective we can readily recognize are of no importance. Yet they're angry over these things, or they desire things with the hope it'll bring them happiness, but we can see how confused they are, how ignorant they are. And this is how beings, so many beings, live their entire lives, engaging forcefully without interruption. So throughout their entire lives, they engage forcefully with vigor and enthusiasm to achieve something or to push something away, neither of which will lead to their attainment of happiness, but instead leads to ongoing suffering. Now this is really useful to observe, just how beings hurt themselves, thinking though that they will attain happiness.
Adonda dordu chikhumaina jisandang anjugi lenyegi number chema shinba denigi semje jinyawa ida ndunro lada mida suhibene dichasan one jigi dibi jawa jebadene mujuji bejuji ani jigores ina kewe jawade ne jeshingo marwas machine banza dibi jawa chiyadu an detebu mangobana nunganya kang ya chagore ani yu gewasa machine banza mangobana digidu dinyaya gyudio mare mebaze mangobana dinyaya de kale khaba chagore dinenza dinegi semjen dikile panyingje skema se ningje a suguro sungor da donda dirwa 즉 dorduine shubena.
In summary, then, the meaning of this verse is that observing behavior of beings across the varying realms, we can recognize how the vast majority of their actions are actually non-virtuous in nature. And they are engaging in these non-virtuous deeds not because they recognize that these are the causes of suffering. They are actually so ignorant that they think these are the causes of happiness. Hence, anger arises or attachment arises, and they act under the influence of these afflictions, with the expectation that they will overcome their problems and they will attain happiness. But they are ignorant of what should be adopted and what should be abandoned, and therefore, instead of accumulating causes for happiness, they are actually accumulating causes for ongoing suffering. So when we recognize that this is how beings act, compassion will naturally arise within us for them.
나디 ngosu soyaide da dinegi ngedige langtor nyamnin ma shinge semjen dige dibajan samada ke wasagi mindu chezadin sagi mindu maobana dunga yongure set odu sonrwada cheza dine sondoida jermiche dehla dedi shule dehla karsungorasne lomatigilya ane cheza dine chine dipasagore cheza dine enza da semjen disulya nyamchu kohabyo mares 난 경험sol야 리딩의 차내에나야 아니 최제하게 안지게 고합이해 봐래 제투야여 봐 고합이해 봐 아니 마 럽진지hen 개위 신인 냠내 림바티겐 라마야 고야 여바래 제사 경험적이 류다 튕기에 차네 아니 띵에 차네 냠len지야 튕기 차상 상되파 아니 현치게 경로서 롭되지 기회 신년 담바 자 딱딱 유예돼 버렸어 되네 여바에서 경로서 고급 되네 여바 될이야 다 구비고 동아용의 규리파 샤하세네 아니 개화용의 디기용의 그 대대레게 고세라 디기용의 그 개화리야 베제 제제 규메체바 냠len 제고리에서 어디서 거다 된다 말로 말마 소에 디송을다
So there are two general points being made in this verse, one explicit, one implicit. So the explicit is, as has been mentioned thus far, that observe the way the vast majority of beings live their life, continuously striving for happiness, striving to overcome problems, but because of their confusion, their ignorance, not knowing what are the actual causes for happiness and the actual causes for suffering, they end up nearly continuously creating further causes for suffering. Thinking like this, compassion for them should arise. So that's the explicit meaning of the verse. The implicit meaning is Lama Tsongkhapa is saying to Nam Kapel, to his student, your situation is not like this, the situation of migrators who are of feeble intelligence. Your situation is remarkably different. You have created a vast number of excellent causes in the past, and now those causes have matured, have ripened. You have met a fully qualified spiritual teacher. You have faith in that teacher. You've received teachings from him, and you have been striving to cultivate those within. So this was expressed in previous verses. So this is your situation, Namkapel. It is vastly different from others. Don't let the situation go to waste. In the same way that other beings, the vast majority of beings, are striving uninterruptedly throughout their lives with great vigor to accumulating causes that will actually lead them to suffer, you now, from this moment forth, strive to accumulate causes that will lead to lasting happiness. Use this opportunity well, and use it well at all times, continuously throughout the day and night. Ensure your mind stays virtuous, and also that your mind is, in terms of engaging in virtue, is forceful, and you are fervently rushing through the door towards virtue.
나 된도게 따위게 대 신비기 지기 레갈레 hen 캐바 아니 캐바로 줘르바다 넘기 직대내게 롭종체제 캐바로 줘르바 대속이 말럽든 주디 가서 신가에 답사실 바질레 롭든 제베나 가르치기에서는 담보 코로나야 아사지들야 지신이 디수도와 디수 교연제 디수 매버서 그랬어. 나 사진에 디니디도와 디수 코연이 뭐죠? 야고서 그랬어. 지사디 담보 사지디기 돈도 깨와라 교연 바체 가르가르 연구부터 디파 tuyanje 교연 디디레도와 디디 매버서 디상모서 디상모서 그랬어야 돼. 교연이 바 담보시 디상모서 디야고서 그랬어야 매버서 그랬어. 순고로와 시고로와 다디시네 안다 나 가지고 그래서는 다 돈도 계획이 튕긴디게 튕길이야 안 사드도 숨어야다 될이야 류야다 추야다 안 지기도 고고래서 튕기는 식으로 제가 디니기 신가 답이야기 롭된 지도갑라 당보 교연의 파스 직제 디상모서 디야고 매버서 그래서 교연의 파시 디니기 안다 교연 마시 사유체야 안다 돈도 계획이 튕긴 거야디 아니 야고티 튕긴디게 사데네 스코어 될 류데네 추데네 고를 줘야된지 고고래서 튕긴 주타래시 디시야도 디엔 디코셰바 나신지 냠는 제바 라렌타바이나 안 돈도디 제보된 것도 돈도 야고기 디 제보된 것도 필요 당제 나서야 강하세야데 용고로 와다 지코 지단에 지딘비 조탄 호로는 거 자원 냠는지들 임바데 당보 지신바সম다 당보 교연당 마직바디파 당보시 디메바서 다시 디네 고야기 아니 튕긴디게 아니 두고야디 마시 디시야도네 디테부 디용그레세 테부디 디젤이야 숨바들 아이 숨바들 시기도 하다는 전화로 디르도와
Take an example from everyday society. If someone wants to farm, for them to be a successful farmer, they have to have education. Without education, they're not going to know what they are doing, and things will not go well. But a farmer who has education, perhaps having learned from their family or from formal education, they will know what is required. They will observe the field that they have and will determine whether the field should first be cleared, how to do so, and then they'll clear the field properly. They'll also analyze the soil to determine what crops will grow well here, and also in this particular climate of this region, what crops are likely to grow. Then what favorable circumstances they will also need, what favorable circumstances are required. For example, what type of fertilizer, what type of machinery, and so forth. So all those conditions that are required, as well as then what time of year is best to plant their crop. So by analyzing well, based on education, and then employing that education, not ignoring it, but utilizing it, they will examine the situation well, gather the required circumstances or conditions, and then put it all into practice. With those causes well established and having accumulated the right conditions, the required conditions, with confidence, one can predict that a good crop will grow. So in this way, by accumulating the right causes, the desired result will follow.
Sungo kar sungo re sene anzol sam dan ha de dang anzol kal la gor sang anzol sam dan ha la gor wa da sam du su stang go gore stine che gore sam dan ha la gore ta sam dan la yo de ngdang bo kar sam dan la gor sene che san du chen so sam du stang go gore si gor da che ya dun zhuo ge wei na jin ya wa da dun zhuo yi da xia de ge yi da de zu tong go ma de dun zhuo se tong go lo wa da sim je dun zhuo ba do mi ba tong go tong yi de da dun zhuo de zhe ya 진간저 개와 주위에 그 고합간의 쓰레기도 콘솔이야 코로나의 띵이 차네 코로나의 고합지라기도 라기민도 아니 마 콘솔이야 지게 시행지 약보지라기도 라기민도 시행지 유나 시행의 콘솔을 판도고도 두고민도 선배기 삼는 땅에도 두시 땅에도다 dunrolia denege 고합도 마시칼이 하고 봐다 아주 통치스 교가 되네칼이 하고 차도요와 디나싱 아주 다네 dunrolia 되네칼이 하고도 아니 미디알 할래야 가는 시어레서 양직 딜레 뒤야 강마지래 삼다와는 미네 점린나래 미바도 메바요레스 제사 디네자 엔데술야 안지 지금 망고진의 소소지 지게 최시 제하게 고합기네면 소소야가다 도스네 안제되야지마도 최게 제하고 고합 매어레 델이야 최시가야 지라고 말에 디네자 디네디네 도와 선배게다 지게 당한 저기 하라 통고말 하라 되는 용고로 와서 누시네 삼다 다삼두신 삼다에도 다 디네지는 거 내가 가르치기도라네 다 dunro이네다 콘로사에도 안 되샤니게도 나제네도 안 지지글이야 쇠원뇌세시에는 도와서 dunro라네 되네도 명아주 밀라 아니 지데네 그 콘로사야다 되샤다 안지 차도다 현래 뇌세시와요 맞지 안 지준시야라 소바다 고호다야라 소바다 쇼직 디바네 쇼사기도와서 사에 디네시 도와서 제산 개와 마사와 디바서 디네시 용도와 선배게도 진짜 삼다네 제나네 디바사나 제보 동아시 용고래 안 제와사바네 디기 용고 제나다 디네 삼다도 대주기 유디바데네 무디제 망고라 사용도 제나다 제보 디기세도 용야 각각 갈래 가고래도 와선배게 두치 삼나시 땅 나와 삼나 두치 땅 고래서 그래
Lama Tsongkhapa, what he's advising us, bearing in mind this illustration, what Lama Tsongkhapa is advising us is, firstly, the context is not in terms of an education in terms of farming, but an education in how to transform our mind. So firstly, Lama Tsongkhapa is advising us to observe what the actual situation is in the world. So we can leave aside unseen beings and just focus on seen beings, the beings that we can actually see. So taking animals. Well, if you think about their situation, it really is quite pitiful in that they do not have the opportunity to train their minds. They do not have the capacity to be guided by a spiritual teacher in terms of what to abandon and what to adopt. It's very difficult to actually help beings in the animal realm. And there are so many stuck there. Then what about the situation of humans? Whilst far less than the animal realm, still there are so many. And amongst this vast number of human beings in our world, so few have a real interest in ethics or in spiritual training. So very few have an interest in coming to understand their mind and transform their mind. And of those few that do, many have that wish, but don't have the time. They need to engage in work, look after their families and so forth. And they may have some aspiration, but other than occasional engagement, largely, they cannot spend time coming to observe their own minds. And then thirdly, so looking at the situation of animals, looking at the situation of humans, and thirdly, we look at how beings tend to live their lives. And we can recognize through the speech and behavior that the motivating minds will be minds such as anger, attachment, jealousy, competitiveness, and so forth. And with the minds that are motivated by afflictions such as these, the causes that are created cannot be causes that lead to happiness. Whilst the individual being may be longing for happiness and to overcome problems, anger does not lead to the accumulation of causes that lead to happiness, only further suffering. Likewise with jealousy, competitiveness, and so forth, when that is the motivating intention, the resulting behavior creates causes that will lead to further suffering, not happiness. So here Lama Tsongkhapa is guiding us to recognize that this is the lived reality of the vast majority of beings.
개박이 신발이야 안티卷되게 되는데 뒤卷되게 매바 속으로서 대 지바로 책으로 와다 삼다다도 쓰자다 모르송도.
And very few who can be like the skilled farmer and accumulate the correct causes that will lead to the desired crop. The vast majority have a wish for that particular crop, but are creating the incorrect causes.
두스는 삼라 당보두스다. 다 니베들라 삼라 가르땅고래 세당아 삼라 가르땅고라선 소소를 삼다제다. 대시 현달 삼다를 둔로다 현달 삼다 두 삼다와 냐 다 소소를 삼다제 삼다이되게라 어당의 류진디 데 지야후이 당아서 최제게 냠내제의 퉁윤 차상 창되바 소소게 제바이나 담이 시에베네 년투여유되게 삼다유되게 말이야 튕긴 소수용원에 빈둔로라 코랑송원에 튕긴 차요 말바다 로마 시간연에 년투여 말 삼다도여 메로 땅알라 둔로다 미다와 안식 배 레니기 삼다유되베 소수기 리팅이 천 저베네 튕긴 차상 차다와 마시에 소수년에 년투바 년비기 된다들이야 삼다나 삼다투에도 소수기 원에 튕긴 차상 차되바시 두 서베 돈테네기 두에 민의 제바지는 소속이 되는 여바데 소속하고 우리 두삼 되네게 삼다 다는 소속이 튕겨 여바이나 소설야 남된지겐 라마 다 담가 보도신 지기 량이게 넘버 chen 땡겐 담바 고엔디 여러 말은 대양알 두스 루아다 제사 되네기 말이야 냠내기 좀봐 땡겐 다 기위신다 라마 두스 제사 되네사 땅 앞에 오레시아스 소소용원이 개화제기 냠는 것이에게 제일 누부여봐 튕긴 소소용원에 튕긴 차상 차다와 다 지용원에 야 소소리야 땡긴 기위신이다 라마 예대바 튕긴 차려봐 지제샤 되네 인자 아는 게다 개화 가서를 하다미 고방 퇴기 디기주의 유들이야 배지 제정에 냠는 지기인스 되네 지당은 무두시에 배지지 냠는 지기인스 배 두신의 삼당고래에서 소소게다 두삼다 소소게 되네기 소소랑이야 삼다제네 소소기 튕긴 차와 리딩원의 튕긴 차와 여바지 안치원의 안시행 라메기 위신 여바지 튕긴 거가 빼 야고 여대바에서 다 구이비오 고디 파가 구이비오 고선 동아요 주 메가와티 파가 디기요야 그 아니 고 아니 저 개와디 주야 되니 냠내 베주신 주기야 삼비기 두치는 삼당고래에서 오다.
This first step that has been mentioned is where we look at the world around us to see the lived situation of the vast majority of beings. The second step then is to turn inwards and look at ourselves. And quickly we'll recognize our great good fortune, how vastly different our circumstances are from the vast majority of beings. And if only looking at animals and humans, we can see how vastly different our situation is. So unlike animals, we can hear teachings and we can understand them. We have the intelligence to understand them. Moreover, unlike the vast majority of people, we have created the causes in the past to have an interest in these teachings. Moreover, we have all the required favorable circumstances that are required to be able to engage with the teachings. And not only do we have this as a capacity, but we aren't living somewhere isolated. We are where there are teachers and teachings. And this is something that to recognize how incredibly fortunate we are. All that is required to be able to transform one's mind, we have achieved. We have some spare time, sufficient material resources, we have teachers and teachings, sufficient intelligence and so forth. All that's required, we have. So this we need to recognize in relation to ourselves. From this then, we should develop the determination to utilize this opportunity fully, to strive without interruption, to make the most of this rare and precious opportunity. And making the most of it means to accumulate the causes for lasting happiness.
도시네 삼다제 소소에 게주주 주야게 냠래 야베스 치오레 세달랍지 조디레다 제상한 줄야 삼르다나디 말레고라 데니기 소소기 베즈에 제제 게주 주제 냠는 제바 있나 니 대고 아니 세텔이나다 모반 디기 용거리에서 오르다 디기 용거리에서 숨거와.
So Lama Tsongkhapa here is guiding us through for initially observing the situation of others and thereby and thereafter looking at our own situation and using these two reflections to generate a determination, to focus our mind at all times on accumulating the causes for lasting happiness. This then is the conclusion to come to in this reflection.
어디는 삼는다나데 다제름 지향 저게 삼는다나 저기 디기 뒤에도 저 삼르톤에 주고 왠자 땅아주 삼는다나데 제베 겹제 두치네 삼땅고레세 삼두스 땅고레세 송고르바 제가 남중아 저기 나저 직소수게 나저 냠뇨 삼다베네 나 수두수이네 기디나 데네게 삼셔던 거 말와 소수가 달려가지 가르치고도 리아게도 달라지 가르치고 니저도 술기 쉐어도 가르치는 저 선배게 데네시마도 안지 디제나 개와를 좋아하다 데네 용 지게 강아체 규디네 샤고르바 디제네 디기주에 디 샤고르와서 베삼로도 기네던 거 말와 제가 알이야 데네게 개와서 유 드링아 랑면에 고합도 여바다 현용원 튕게 시용원에 아니 랍겐게 외신 여바를 요레선 베삼로도 땅에 따야지 뉴유로 와 당하죠. 뉴유로 와. 제가 망체에 가서 서서는 저기 소수게 레가로제 디던다 두야 디던다 두야던다래 가브리엘야 밀리아지 코르즈 룽된 거 하다 가브리엘야지 기진이 보셔와다 말아지지 지게 가브리엘야 아주 류 거네 슈슈 레가슈 자워마도 삼마다나 토네 시라기 장도지 삼마다에 될래 깔래하고 뉴유로 와. 제가 데니기 지 삼다데 두스탄고 그래. 두스탄에 야네 야도 삼로까지 슉셔버 따베네 디지게 삼로들 누베 슉셔래 거래 삼로까지 누베 슉셔바이레베네 맞아 개와서 디레다 간제 소수기 신뢰 펜베 삼로 삼단에 디 개와래 젠리아 안지기 펜베 삼나 나야다 징이 젠레 류마 유스미 젠레 네버 지기메 세베 삼나 다 디삼노 그런 개와리다 개와세디 미시가 미 통하야 도도 메레 디삼노 그런 개와리 다 젠리아 콩로세디 콩로 젠레 네버 지에게 삼노 주네 디삼노 디버레다 가지 지세 개와의 디버세디 두 삼노 때는 리고 지나 디네자 땅안주기 두스 뭐 퇴베 토네 두 삼다나 다 젠리아 펜베 삼나 다다 이 개와리야 냠네 지기 세베 삼다나 차상 개와차들 두시네 다 삼나 다다 두시네 삼당고레스 데니게 삼나 다지는 소소게 지데 소소 야고이 다 류딘트네 야고여 바다 안 소소레 튕겐디게 랍칸 개외신이네 야고여 바 디네 야고도 튕긴 차상 좀빼 야고도 선배 삼묘도 소소라리아 냠는지에게 뽑아기야다. 어다 디링가 되네 고비여바데 등에 고갑티 니담 직담부 진제제 냠는지 매진때 배사그리 제가 용어시우라서 선배게다 디네게 냠는지야리아 준주다 매진지야리아 아니지게 슈체발이고 닝도다 디네 배주지야리아 슈체발이야 디네 제바점기 소소리아 개와 슈체세고 삼로가제디 개외 삼로 야네 양도 삼다는 윤리와 같이 삼다는 개와 망하사고로다.
As mentioned in our first session yesterday morning, happiness comes primarily from our way of thinking. Through developing a skilled mind, whatever we encounter, if we are skillful in our way of thinking, we will not experience that as a problem or as a difficulty, but our mind will stay at peace, at ease. So this, for most of us, is still theoretical. We have yet to really experience that. But when we look at our lives, we can recognize that how we live our lives is not that different from the vast majority of people. Our thoughts are dominated by various thoughts about our work and problems and opportunities, in terms of our social life, entertainment, having a good time, and various gossip and ongoings in our personal lives. This is what consumes the vast majority of our thoughts. Very little time is given over to our spiritual development. And that is the case even though we are counted amongst those very few people who have a deep interest in spiritual development. Further, here it's important to really come to recognize this for ourselves. Where are our thoughts the vast majority of the day? And we'll see it's desiring some minor pleasure, desiring things to go in a particular way, getting annoyed when they don't go in a particular way, getting annoyed when someone merely says something or looks at us in a way we don't like. Things really of no significance. This is important to reflect on, because it's imperative to understand what we have achieved in terms of this rebirth, this opportunity that we have, these imprints, these karmic causes we have accumulated, but also to recognize that the vast majority of our time is lost in distraction, lost following things that are of no real value. So this needs to be reflected on again and again, so that we have the strength of mind to turn away from that. And what is it that we need to turn our mind towards? Virtue. Develop that determination to accumulate the causes that will lead to lasting happiness, to not let this opportunity go to waste, so to accumulate virtue. And then what does this term, virtue or merit, what does merit mean? What does virtue mean? It refers to our way of thinking. So just like I said at the beginning of the segment and said yesterday, happiness comes primarily from our way of thinking. Virtue or merit refers to wholesome ways of thinking. To understand then what is our wholesome ways of thinking, we come to understand the Dharma, what should be adopted, what should be abandoned. But in brief, wholesome ways of thinking would tend to include valuing others, not wanting to harm others, and having a mind that is gentle and caring towards all beings. Moreover, a mind that is not influenced or dominated by afflictions such as anger, attachment, jealousy, pride, and so forth. So to accumulate merit or virtue means to develop these thoughts. And the more frequently our thoughts are virtuous, the more virtue we accumulate. So therefore, the more time and energy we put into ensuring that our mind stays virtuous, the more virtue that we are accumulating. So this is what we need to do. Be mindful of our mental state and at all times ensure that it is virtuous, it is not afflicted. This is what we need to do to utilize this life well and to accumulate causes for lasting happiness.
Yudan divu se ko penen an zuge sabin roshi sabin yakpo chuyo na divu yakpo chuyung kure sabin di yakpo mena divu yakpo yung mara siya shirwa da chesa da an zuge da gewa lam na mara na an zu samlo tanha di samlo tanha yakpo chabay na di gyu res di divu diki yung kure si urwa da samlo tanha yakpo me bachi na gyu yakpo mares di divu ane yakpo yung mara dunga kanga si diki re si urwa chesa dine sa na an zuge Chögi Geshe de Gyawadan Digba se Kishigore. Mado Dondala and some Tamen Gudan Jevo. Gu Samlo di Denish Tamen di Gudi Guchayong, di Jebuka Ziongrosene, Yapochungres, Pene gave some La Shanlia, Sawa Chikime, Samlo da Shanlia, Jambadan Seve, Samlo Tamen, di Gudes, Digi Jebu Kariungoresena, and Mobana Sosula Digungre, Shanlia Digungre, such. Da Shanlia Nube Sambadan Seve, Sambar Kevana, di Samlo di Guchagora, di Jebu Kariungrosene, Jema Rana Makiba Shanla Makinikala Kangachungure, such. Sinada, and to choosing Nala, because some Lugi Tone Chigi Yadu to Yadele, Gawa the Dipas and Ma Chik Beja and Gawa Dipal Mado, choosing Tone Bejitama, Dondala, some Taban, Gudan Jevil Chari. Chazan Guya China, Jevapungure, Guya Mena, Jevapumara said, Donda this more.
The terminology virtue and non-virtue, these aren't terms that are generally used in society, but tend to be used more in a religious context. In society, though, if we apply our understanding from society about cause and effect, that if there's a particular result we want to achieve, we know that we need to accumulate the appropriate causes to achieve that result. So if we take that understanding, we can understand that if we desire happiness, we need to accumulate the appropriate causes. Those appropriate causes are wholesome ways of thinking, or virtuous ways of thinking. Through developing wholesome ways of thinking, we create the causes that will lead to the result of happiness. Happiness for ourselves, and through us having a positive influence on others, we'll bring happiness into the lives of others too. And conversely, through unwholesome ways of thinking, non-virtuous ways of thinking, these are the causes that will lead to the result of suffering for ourselves, and through the expression of non-virtuous ways of thinking, we'll bring unhappiness to the lives of others. So therefore, to understand what virtuous and non-virtuous means, think of it in terms of causes, wholesome causes which will lead to happiness. So those wholesome causes of virtue or merit, and they lead to the result of happiness. Unwholesome causes are non-virtuous ways of thinking, and they lead to the result of suffering.
Dine da ngan zu ge chi ge de da ning bo ngan zu ya nyam len che de ngan zu sam na dang go de da du che de ngan zu nyam su le de re che sa chen rang ge lu din cha de na rang ge che ge ge shu tu bia ya ane chi be je je ba na cha sa tun gen cha de ba nu bo yu ba du da rang le ya lap ken da de ni ge ma she ken ina ge guan ya yue ba tun gen cha sa je sa Rangungwene, Tunye Tawa, Shen, Chi Wene, Tunye Tawa, Tunye Tande, Bear, Oresha, Sembingedi, Nalia, Yakushu, Rasha, Sembeke, Sosuki, Yaburesha, Sembe, Soso Povake. Then Degi Tindelia, Goho Yoba Deliang, Chiki, Java, the Yamlendi, Bezushi, Huda Badaji, Yun Mudishe, Yundi Jigia, Sembeke, Samla Danjine, Sosuke, Gavati Gang to the Chehore, Yamlen Chehore, Esset, Sungor, the Nanibuanzuke, the Yamlen Jedi, some not do stango, the Chehore, some not done, Pa Lalen, Pa Chike, Shelia, Sixupshia, Deniki, Nusum Kiego, Go Ravene, or Chick go Radio, didn't Nusum Makivache, and Duchi and Zembala Sopada, Deniki, which I would to Pukuri said, to Dading as Yamsulia did it.
Summarized in the meaning of the 6th verse is we observe the condition, the actual situation in the world, then look at ourselves, and then come to the determination. The result to come to is the determination to not waste this rare and special opportunity that we have all achieved. And the way not to waste it comes down to being mindful of our way of thinking, to take great care of our way of thinking. And as everything we do involves the participation of our mind, at all times, no matter what we are doing, we have then the opportunity to take care of our mind, to ensure that our mind is not under the influence of the afflictions. And when we notice afflictions arising, to immediately dispel those afflictions, and rather to ensure that whatever we are doing, our mind is staying wholesome, is staying virtuous, and thereby our interactions, whether alone or with others, are wholesome and virtuous. This is the determination we need to set for how we live our lives. So here, as has been said, we need to engage forcefully and with determination repeatedly over a sustained period. So this means at all times, no matter what we are doing, ensure that our mind is virtuous. Not solely in informal religious contexts, such as in teachings or in meditation, but at all times.
And do see the Gave Java, as the Chin Yesha, Dino Com Gerard, Bear Yakuchunsha, that in Yakuchunsha, the Coop Dion, Chipe Yakuchunsha, and Big Susuki giving Yamlen Chigo, that Mahobana, Digi to Yare, Shanlia, and Digi to Yakutunanga to do Sigur, Bear Yakuchunsha, and Susuki Kahokomiada, didn't Gahokomiache. And the Mahobana Muduche, Deniki, Chia Cooperative, Chia, and Big at Duchine, as the same some Navena, and Duchine. Jike when you some Davina that thing to do sin, Jike on Com Charles, dear Com Jani, Cashin, Com Japti, Gaopato me Basagor, Titek, Nazuki, Jerim Chiki, Sonshap and Nashin, and Chik Sumba Nashing out the Yamlin Chiki or what, Jeva and Zanda Sosuke Kaocomiare, Kaokum Nakom Chobaja, Kaocomiare, that moody in the Mobanina, then they already in Yamlin Chikins and Bigida, Dusin some daddy in Gichimochagore.
And here it's appropriate to repeat what was mentioned yesterday morning. Recognize then that not only have you achieved a remarkable rebirth, and with this incredible opportunity through having an interest in the Dharma and having met teachings and teachers, but recognize that you made the decision, you had the imprints in the past, and you've utilized them to make that decision to come here this weekend, sit quietly, join a retreat, hear teachings, engage in meditation. This is something of great rarity in our world. There are so few people who have such an opportunity. There are quite a few who have the wish, but so few have that opportunity. So rejoice in your decision to come here. Rejoice in the causes that you have accumulated that led you to be able to make this decision. And through the importance of rejoicing is that one rejoices in dependence on recognizing the causes that you yourself have accumulated. And through rejoicing, one strengthens one's determination to continue to accumulate such causes. And in particular here, strengthens the determination that whatever one learns and learns in the classes and gains familiarity with in the meditations, I will continue to do them outside of the retreat environment. And I will strive that slowly to develop a habituation throughout my day to ensure my mind stays virtuous. And in this way, I will continue to train my mind just like Lama Tsongkhapa is guiding me to do.
That didn't nipa dele ma dene dele jibi jule rinsonwe dembe tsulu topara gyurbane de rangba topara mekyurde peme yembe rizir lupon shins.
The seventh verse. In order to turn entirely away from the conduct of the immature, the supreme system needs to be attained. However, merely achieving that is not sufficient, as it would be like a lotus ornamenting a peak being found by just a donkey or sheep.
That dele jibi jule rinsonwe dembe tsulu topara gyurnanis. Jibi jule se jiba sayde anzu jidani jiba lana pula garwada. Pugu lega dike puchunchun zemze lega donda nimbos ke shayo marwada. Koda donda gechembo de nimbo jela chitas beje meher jiwade lega jidan jibi juse. Jisnada jidan anzu jiba jebasine deni puchunchun ke lega ro kuore. Inada dade donda de karosne jiba saydi deji kondo shepanaji 게디게 랑도르 남이 마신겐기 미델레 지바세밍 부나시사제 도라 다 레가데 지다 부나 지바스 데니기 레가 가르쳐서는다 나저기 샬리아 차와제야다 녀바제야다 두신 레가데 죄바세 도와 데니기 죄바 자와디스 지비죄라 데레 르송베스 다디 파 죄바지 빵제 데니기 죄바다 디비 자와레가데 죄바데 빵제 샬리아 아니 르송베 담비 술 링도 소화라도 파 빵와지 마제바지로와 델레 링도 소안에 안에 가르쳐서 담비 술룩세도 룡아 유스메샬라 네바지메스 수림 소야다 에다 짐바다에다 담바세도 기보 담바 안에 파베 가사데 얘기 냠는제 디르와다 룡아 니주도 수림 소야 쇠바콤이야 전주저야 딩냠는제 담비 술룩 담바디기 냠는제고 엔디나시 아주에네 안직 담비 술룩다 튠바 아니 아까서 능아이스 미에주 튠비 수름 소야 쇠바콤이야 아니 집에 냠는 제바이나 아니 같이 오르스네 아니 제와 체마 술루 토바르 규르신 토바진 사다미고 봐 투고레제레 담비 술룩 세디 담바는 냠는 제디 짐바 수른 쇠바전에 냠는 제바 나신 아주게 디니기 냠는 제어도 In order
to turn entirely away from the conduct of the immature, so this term translated as immature can also be translated as childish. So here what comes to mind then is the behavior of children. So children, we know their mind is so easily distracted, they easily become excited, easily become angry, and tend to not focus on what's important. So this is how children tend to live. And here, such behavior is likened to those who do not know how to cultivate a path within, and who are not cultivating a path, but are rather striving in meaningless activity. So just like a child is obsessed with entertaining themselves, so too the majority of people put their energy into things which have no great purpose. So this is the kind of behavior or conduct that we need to turn entirely away from, and rather engage in. So instead of the supreme method, we could maybe say the genuine system needs to be attained. This refers to one needs to cultivate the causes that lead to a good rebirth. So, cultivate the causes that lead to a good rebirth. In particular, ethical restraint, as well as generosity and so forth. These are what we need to cultivate. We need to abandon the distraction to meaningless activity and rather have our mind on ethics, generosity, and so forth, and thereby create the causes that lead to good rebirth.
And that do your best and the rangba topper migure desida, ye ramba di rangba topper migure desida, Chisalada mi go toba in a negap Nansong Dunghale Tarache, Lada mi the YouTube share, Hulu, chickens to dig in your orate, Inea, dig a ye rangba, that Jison Sampe Tarba said, Corvi Dunga Tadal Dredge, Dunga Yoma Tarsa, Tarba said, Tobio best and Tobio Mares, Chezan, di Ramba, Topper Migure, Chezan, Negap some Nansong Dunghale Tarjin, Digiji, Yungu or Dugu or Mado, and Dingi, Diawa, that ye Rambas and that Jison Sampe, that Ganga say Tablam la Bezichi Mar Sampe Tarba said, ye Rambi Tarbadi, Tobio Mares, di Ramba, Topper Migure Diese.
But whilst it's important that one cultivates the genuine system within, in other words, cultivates the causes that will lead to an excellent rebirth, once again as a human or as a god, that, as we see in the third line, merely achieving that is not sufficient. So whilst it's imperative that we do accumulate the causes that will ripen into good rebirths, we shouldn't be satisfied with striving for such a result, because, as we know from this rebirth, one still is bound in the suffering realms of samsara. One is not yet at all liberated from samsara. So therefore, one shouldn't be satisfied with merely a good rebirth. One needs to progress towards liberation and enlightenment.
Jasa dada nga zu samdame de nga zu lu de mi lu top de ro jasa mi lu top yan sa jawa nga ma ani chi mi lu to ya yun yu surim su ya da ne se ba kom ya zun 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 ba ani ji ge jin ba nyam len je ba le de nga zu da de mi lu top de ro mi lu top de yi na da ji de gi phun sun so ba da yun ye gang a ji ma che di ji ge 디기 타도 받래 여러 배선에 내요 말하디 아주게 냠냠 샤대로 봐 내요 말아봐 제제 디니에서 아니 뭐 바나 밀리 타다 미고 뭐 토바 있나요 안 디기 폰선 줘봐 지게 탈바세데 토요 말레스 토요 말와스 변나서다 오게데 변메 gembe 리즈르 루본 신세데 제자다 베디 시송을 제자다 베도 변마라 소바다 지신야고 예되게 사제야고 아니 바바지 데니게 지신 약고여봐 매도 약고여봐 지기 접시에다 되네 약고여되긴 바리로 제로 직gang 전부 시간이야 룩다 봉고디기 파데 샤샤베나 은 거기서 빼자야 여러 기부 여러 주요 동야 기부 여러 안에 지기 차와치도 신나들 마주야다 양지기 장선 치료 받는 님을 줘야라서 반 사야 동야의 기부지 여러 내가 그 기부지 여러 때 다고 된자 되네 기부를 여러 배스네 dini mera wada. Medu karasene, ane gali zadi je kam rukure, ane saane zadi yo zo rukurwa, ane dusine, ane jelia ganga chegi yongyo barwa. Chesan, dini ki ganga chegi yonggo orde, dini ganga yo digin, midi ki kasa lukta bongo digi, maungban out ganga chegi zadi saasana maungban ragamba maungbu ganga chegi sembe samlu che dansing barwa. Odi dansing barwa. 베디지 소르다 지산 내가 브릴리아 콘솔리아 디기다 지기 야고 중고르데 이내 콘솔리아 자체야 푼순소 마오바네 무디지 라기르베스는 라야 가보래 지산 내가 콘솔리 디기 요르데 이내 지금 무디지 콘솔리 디기 요하데 깔래 가보러 와스
The life that all of us have achieved has come about in dependence that we accumulated in lives previous to this. Those causes would have been primarily ethical restraint, as well as generosity, patience, joyous perseverance, and prayer, and this led to the result that we've achieved in this life. But as we know, we are far from having attained freedom from suffering. We all have experience of sufferings and pain and difficulties. So if we create solely the causes that will lead to a good rebirth again, we know we will continue to suffer in that rebirth. We have to lift our vision, strive for a greater goal. Otherwise, we can be likened to, and in the final line, a lotus ornamenting a peak being found by just a donkey or sheep. So what this is referring to is if one imagines on a peak of a mountain somehow a lotus growing there, this would be a very rare event. And wild sheep or donkeys coming across such a lotus on the peak of a mountain, they would be delighted, something delicious to eat, and they would happily eat it, enjoying the pleasure of their fortunate find. But they have no thought about, maybe if I don't eat the lotus, there'll be more tomorrow. Or what can I do to ensure tomorrow is better than today? The donkey and the sheep, like the immature, the childish, are distracted by immediate gratification. So we need to be better than that, thinking about our future situation, not being distracted by today's pleasures.
담비게 라미게 냠는 템바나지 가라주 냠마 깨왕아마 있네 다른 세들 삼담베나 먼저 깨왕아메게 근데 지 령아 예수 예수 준비 추dim송야다 네 세버kom에 진변 냠는 제발라 소바 떼내가서 대 밀리시 터바래 제사다 톱 대비게 된델이야 당아서 당아미 인가 기부도 더 가르치나 가서 라와도 선배 삼단제 안직 디베제 단제 마오바나 안지 네,毛把那地缘的距离啊，必须三马大去对吧？那三今年马大去对吧？但是这里已经甭管那路那些人，或者在地有把的几乎都是种这个马到老街马的毛把搞的这个是别三大新高嘛是吧？地那新差的个的，实际上点那个啊这里，但是我从个东岸来，他那些米绿点的呀，地区这边过好些啥样的马到，我就电一电话投药嘛的，实际上的。电台了呀，米绿电台了呀，这个电一电话特别给别做些国家推荐车上要把的呀，的别做这些年龄这些，他说特别给距离别做些过来，是送我当然因为的送我的。
The meaning here is that in lives previous to this, we accumulated the causes that led to this rebirth, primarily ethics, but as well as generosity, patience, joy, perseverance, and prayer. Now we're enjoying the results of our endeavors in the past. But don't be like the immature and be deceived by this attainment, thinking that the pleasures that can be experienced by humans is as good as it can get. Otherwise, if we're thinking like that, we're no different from the donkey or sheep who experiences these transitory pleasures and thinks this is as good as it can be. Rather, we need to recognize that we have the capacity, even as limited people, we have the capacity to radically transform our mind and attain happiness far beyond what people who are likened to the immature or donkey or sheep, what they think is possible. We can progress towards and even attain liberation from suffering. This is all within our grasp.
When we think Yamaki, and the Guyapo Saja, that the Diapo told to be Delia, and the Mohombana, and Dingy, the Autobek, Tarbiko, Toyachilia, Yamneji, Bezuchia, Sambeki, Nenege, some Daje, Susuki, that Tarba Toya, Dondalaya, and Yamneji, Bezuchi, or essay. That Donda nobody did it in Yigita, Donna, nobody answered Yamneji, Susuka, some down, she had Labjara, Mason, some like you are not going to do that.
Of these two verses, the first that we looked at, the 6th verse, there Lama Tsongkhapa is guiding us to firstly look at the lived experience or the lived reality of the vast number of beings in the world, and we come to recognize that they are lost and confused in that they, whilst yearning for happiness, they keep creating causes that will lead to ongoing suffering. But we have accumulated in past lives the causes for this excellent rebirth. And therefore, we have achieved something quite rare. So rare as to almost be said to be impossible. And yet we have achieved it. So therefore, do not let it go to waste. And in the 2nd verse, here Lama Tsongkhapa is again guiding us to recognize that what we have achieved has come about in dependence on our own endeavors in past lives. Through the causes we've created, we now have achieved this result. But if we only do the same as what we've done in the past, we'll continue to only receive results such as this. And we know the human rebirth, even a precious human rebirth, is still bound within suffering. So therefore, we need to utilize this opportunity to create causes beyond what causes beyond what we have created already, because we have the capacity to achieve something far greater, to achieve liberation from suffering in its entirety, to achieve happiness that is lasting, stable, and never punctuated by a moment of suffering.
That is your assassin. Do it, you might do it, yeah. Then you that's just a little bit. Oh.
Then der kommt die Jesu, den not so more chedu, not so intimate more chedu, they were more chedu, doesn't more machina, not so more chedu, not so coursing down to more chedu, Yamena not so penalum, they Mumasaki Kika, but they never circular. Then not so company of pressure of the Korsum Jesu. Company of pressure of the countries not Saki Kika, some to check the other.
Watch the Korsum, the Ember Mimba, some done watch over a zero. Chisadan, you get on where the Dakshan Jibets and I run on to Basio Mare, Nevanzada, I got Pam Mata Machibetsna, and the part she handily doing a talk about some Yores and became some Daje. And the Kawa didn't watch here, watch the Diro, Korsum side, the core, Gawa Sabo Kansa, Gawasa, Gawa Korong, and the chief watch say, you, Gawa, the Sungan. Mingyang Dao some of the Rang when you do but your Mare, some Dao Tone, don't watch it. The Gawa Sun Yup Jesam and the Gawa Shuk Church Agorova. Gawa Chebaina, Tombanigi Musungup Chekishigo Marva. Jisan to Gawangudi Gabla, Kursum Mamiba, some Dutch do some done watch it, and it did. The more Jebaina, Dinu Gawati, and I do Condashine, given the jump to Mares or Jumbo Mare level. Temple Jukish Madame was in it. Then how to get Jalati, Mishanchi, the Jewish Abena, and I do Mukana, Jewish Abena, then you got Penikidina layer by Chagro, Dina, she Chagro. Mother ranking Lavan Kuma Shuras Guy, check Marwa. 동반이 기시 말해대. 오 제배나 동반이 삼당마다 동반이 삼당의 개화도 오디 숙체체로 뉴버체체로 동반이 삼마다메네 개화오와 제배나 무위기 개화디 네 코너 준준하비가 마좀 두고 말해서 가지고
So we'll can leave the class there for now and continue this afternoon. But before we go, Seppel had a question. So Seppel's question was about when we dedicate with an understanding of emptiness, then we protect the previously accumulated virtue from being lost or destroyed by anger. So how does that work? So Geshe replies by saying that it's not that the anger it's not that the previously accumulated virtue is protected by the wisdom understanding emptiness. It's rather that through reflecting on emptiness, when one is dedicating, the dedication becomes so much larger that a brief period of anger will not be able to destroy it. So to express it again, that when one dedicates with an understanding of emptiness, such as of the three spheres, the action, the activity, and the doer, then when the virtue one is accumulated gets conjoined with the virtue from the understanding of emptiness, and this makes it so big or so powerful that anger is of insufficient strength to be able to destroy it. Okay. Thank you.